Hello and welcome to the I Know Nothing About Beer podcast slash vlog. This is my second video ever. I'm so excited. Everybody, how in the world are you doing out there in YouTube land, in podcast land? If this is your first time listening, watching me, welcome to the I Know Nothing About Beer. I'm just going to call it podcast because that's kind of what it is. Thank you. Really appreciate you tuning in. If this is not your first time listening to my show, hey, welcome back. I so appreciate you. Man, I'm so glad to be behind the mic right now. So this is part two of a two-part series. So my first part was, why is craft beer so expensive? This is part of my Barstool rants. If you're new, I've got a couple different little series that I do throughout my podcast. So I've got my Pies Pint. Thank you, Paul of Illicit Aleworks, for giving me that name. I'm always going to drop his name on that because he's just a cool guy. I've got my general I Know Nothing About Beer, where I do interviews with different people, learn about beer. And I've got my Pious Pint, where I feel like God and community beer kind of mix. Got my Dad into Beer, which is a series about being a dad into beer. And then I have this, my Barstool Rants, where it is a series where if you were to sit down next to me and ask me like, hey, why is beer so expensive? I would give you, an answer much shorter than 10 minutes. But if, you let me talk your ear off, I will. Or I try to get an answer to you in 10 minutes, a really well, short, condensed answer on a question. So today it is the second half, from why is craft beer so expensive to now craft beer on a budget. How to do craft beer on a budget, because that's what everybody's kind of a little more on nowadays. As I'm recording this, it is June 27th, and we in Texas just got another round we've had a large round of COVID cases come through. All the bars just got closed again. And so, everybody just kind of feeling the pinch just a little more. So I want to give you a couple tips on how I do beer on a budget. So here we go. First, plan it out. I like to buy beers on weekends because, one, it's after payday. And two, you can kind of get an idea of what's going to be coming out. Breweries like to announce that they're going to be doing their new release generally on a Wednesday, Thursday. And so, you have your weekend, drink the beer, Monday, Tuesday to just I kind of like to dry out. And then, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to look at what's going to be coming up next. Not that I'm buying beer every weekend. Another way to make your money go a lot farther, don't buy beer every single weekend. But to plan it out. I like this because when I plan out the beer that I'm going to buy, when I know I'm going to go buy beer from this bottle shop or this crowler bar or this brewery, it helps me not be as tempted to buy other beer when I'm at a grocery store or something like that. For one, a lot of grocery stores, their stock on beer is super old. I can't tell you how many times I've bought a beer, looked at the made on date, and it's been 3+ more months. Generally not great for your beer. Planning it out really helps out, because then you know how much you're going to be spending, how much to kind of budget for. Second off, styles. There are certain styles that are just going to be cheaper. Generally going to be cheaper. Lagers are a style that are generally going to be cheaper. So let me just break this up real quick. Generally, beer is made up into two different styles. You have lagers and ales. Ale meaning it's been fermented with a yeast that is top fermenting. It's a yeast that can be fermented at a higher temperature, generally a higher temperature. And these are generally sweeter tasting, more full-bodied. A lot of stouts are ales. Your pale ale, IPA, India Pale Ale. These are beers that generally can withhold a little more alcohol. And because they tend to be a little sweeter, lend more to having more hops added. Okay, and this is a very general rule. Then you have your lagers, your pilsners, your dunkels, your helles. These are all beers that are bottom fermenting, meaning that the yeast likes to settle down at the bottom to do its fermentation, and that they like to be fermented at a much cooler temperature and for much longer. Lager meaning store, wait in German. And so your lagers generally take much longer to ferment. There's some tricks that brewers do to get a faster fermenting lager. Generally take about a month plus, some 3 months. But I know that Budweiser, there's a term grain to glass. So when the grain enters the brewery to when they're able to pour it out into a glass, has like a 3 week total time, which is insane for a lager. Like that is insanely quick. Um, so you got that. But generally Pilsners, because their ingredients are generally so cheap, and they may take a little more time to ferment, but you can do some shortcuts. Generally, they're much cheaper styles. Your Pilsners, there's a couple of them. There's one locally that is the lightest beer that you have from Turning Point. It's great, but it's a really light lager. I think they pump it out pretty quick. But there's not a lot of hops. Yes, there's grain, but the grain's really cheap. The yeast is really cheap. And so generally, those will cost about half, maybe less than half of what like a style like an IPA or especially New England IPA will cost you. So looking at something, or that has generally a lighter ABV, your session IPAs, because they're just not as big. When you think of beers, the higher the alcohol generally means the more stuff there's in it, which means it's going to be a little more expensive. Buying in bulk is another way to go. Your 32-ounce cans to your big, giant, enormous, gallon growlers are really cool. And buying in bulk does lend to being a little cheaper per ounce. Now, the thing about beer, once it's opened, you got to drink it, or else it goes bad in about 24 hours. It's not like wine where you can put the cork in and you got table wine the next day. But beer the next day, not going to taste good. It's going to oxidize. Oxygen's going to get into it. It's going to change the flavor. The carbon dioxide is going to leave, and you end up with flat, oxidized, skunky beer. That's no good all the way around. So if you're going to be buying in bulk, what I've done is, especially if I buy like a big 32-ounce crowler, that's my one beer for the night. I just have that. It's 2 pints worth, and I start a little before dinner, and it lasts me through dinner and into the night. And that's kind of what I drink. That's my one deal. Next one would be being purposeful about buying that one beer. So there's a beer that I love from the brewery, Brewery, out in Southern California. It's called Black Tuesday, and it is a beer that comes out to be about 19.5%. Costs about $30 a bottle, and I just know that in October I'm going to be buying a couple bottles of those. I have friends that I buy those bottles for. Some I give out as gifts. Some we will trade off for and things like that. But those are ones that I know I love, and I'm very purposeful about it. And then when I buy those beers, I'm not buying a lot of other booze at all. Not a whole lot of anything in October. Why? Because I'm looking forward to buying my Black Tuesday. Yes, $30 a bottle is a bit. But it's also a beer that can sit and age in cellar for decades. It has so much alcohol in it. It is such a big beer. In fact, it doesn't really, honestly, taste all that great until about minimum 2 years in the bottle, probably 5 years, 7 years is probably where it tastes really good. So I've got a couple bottles earmarked for my daughters when they turn 21. I can't wait to drink those. I mean, they're not for them. They're for me to celebrate them getting to 21. So yeah. Another one, this is kind of my last part, is trading. Beers have a certain currency to them. So there is a whole market on trading. So you can buy one beer for one person is worth maybe 5 or 6 beers to another. There was a beer that I'd had many times in California, and I had a spare bottle, and my buddy gave me, it was his white whale. It was the one beer that he had been waiting. It was a barley wine from Firestone Walker, and the name is escaping me now. What was the name of that beer? Oh my goodness. Chris Letter, if you're listening to it, remind me, what was the name of that beer? It's a barley wine from Firestone Walker. Anyways, he gave me so many bottles for that beer, and I had before more than a few times. So I was like, dude, yours. And he more than well paid me back for that in bottles. But trading or having relationships in the beer community, building up relationships in the beer community, and this is not that it should be expected, but I do have my friends that I cannot wait to buy a beer for them, and I know that they're looking out for beers for me. And it's a mutual thing. It's like it's not one-upsmanship. It's not like, oh, look at this cool new beer that I got for you, and I hope that you get me, and saying like you better get me something better. It's a very genuine, like, I'm so excited for you to try this beer. I bought it and I cannot wait to give it to you, and don't pay me back. I don't want anything else. And of course, they're probably going to want to give you something back. But I've gotten so many beers by just being friends with people that I'm excited to give them a beer back. And they know that, and I know that, and it's a very mutual thing. There you go. There's a couple tips on how to do beer on a budget. I hope those are helpful. Let me know if those are helpful for you. If you're on the YouTubes, rate, subscribe, do the little bell thingy, the thumbs up thingy down below. You know what this is. That's not the first time you've heard that. If you're listening to the podcast, thank you so very much. I really appreciate you on YouTube, listening to the YouTubes. If you could please rate and subscribe on iTunes. I know that not everybody uses iTunes, but it's the best way for me to know that you're listening, whether you like it or you don't like it. I just want to know. Other than that, drop me a line on the Instagrams, the Twitters, at Al the Brewer, at Gmail at althebrewer.com, or althebrewer@gmail.com, and althebrewer.com. I know nothing about beer.com. You know how to do these things. Everybody, have yourself a good rest of the day. Cheers.